Minister, the government has allocated €10 million to the coach industry, and that's very welcome and it's to be distributed via Fáilte Ireland. However, to date, not 1 cent has been allocated. Now, the private hire market has completely collapsed. There are 1,700 operators in the country employing 11,500 people. And that fund is equivalent to €870 for each of those employees. This is insufficient to deal with the specific problem that the industry faces, and an industry that carries approximately 75 million passengers a year.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Ryan, please.
Deputy, I want to assure you that we are, and ourselves and the NTA are actively engaging in entering into contract arrangements for these new temporary funding supports with licensed bus operators who are providing necessary public transport services. Furthermore, both the NTA and my department have been engaging directly with commercial bus operators throughout the crisis to help inform policy decisions in relation to the public transport sector as we continue to deal with the impact of COVID-19. I am aware of the very difficult business environment that the commercial operators have been facing. Indeed, across government, we have been acutely aware that it presents challenges for so many different business sectors. Public transport is a key facilitator of interaction in the economy and society. It's an efficient and sustainable way of getting people to work, education, shopping and other social engagements. The essential nature of these services have been acknowledged on a number of occasions in recent months, most notably in the decisions to provide additional funding for public service obligation services and the introduction of temporary funding measures for the licensed bus sector. These temporary funding supports have been introduced to help raise the financial pressure on operators arising from the fall in passenger numbers and associated drop in fare revenue as a result of COVID-19. They are aimed at ensuring the continued operation of essential licensed bus services for a period of up to 6 months and are targeted at covering the gap between specified costs and the revenues generated on the services. The supports are targeted at those classes of bus services where a clear public interest justification supports such intervention in line with the relevant state aid considerations. The NTA is responsible for administering the funding support and is in process of entering into contracts with the relevant operators. These supports are in addition to the suite of other financial support measures that the Government has introduced to help mitigate the impact of COVID-19, including the pandemic unemployment payment, which operators can avail of and which remains open to new applicants until the end of the year, and a COVID-19 enterprise support grant, which can be put towards the costs associated with the reopening of business, including the purchase of cleaning materials and personal protective equipment. These measures are in addition to rate waivers, lending facilities, equity injection and business advisory supports, all of which improve cash flow. The Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation have also set up an online tool to help support Irish start-ups and SMEs to navigate the range of supports and identify which support might be most relevant to their business.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Nupton, please.
Minister, I'll synopsise what you've just said. If you're not a licensed bus operator providing a licensed service, if you're not contracted to Bus Éireann, then there's nothing for you. Because, as you know, Minister, the NTA has washed its hands of the industry outside of the licensed sector. As you know, Minister, I wrote to you in August and to the NTA regarding the private school bus operators in this country who hadn't even got a single sheet of paper as to how they were going to operate their services from the 1st of September, meeting the COVID criteria. The NTA came back and said, not their problem. I'm still waiting for the response from you as Minister for Transport to that issue. The reality is, Minister, that the vast majority of coach operators in this country are being ignored. The only fund that has been put in place is through Fáilte Ireland, and not a single cent has been distributed to those operators.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister Ryan.
No, Deputy, I am very glad you mentioned that school transport service, because that is another key element in the jigsaw of coach and bus operators. And myself and Minister Nocton met the various operators, the whole wide spectrum, as I said, of people in the tourism industry, people in school, people in public service contracts and others. It is, however, responsibility primarily of the Department of Education in managing the engagement with school bus transport system. And one of the further mechanisms that the Government are looking at, I hope, may be of benefit to a wide variety of coach operators, because Due to the late notice but appropriate advice from the health system regarding the restriction in bus capacity numbers, the Department of Education has gone out, has been engaged in recent weeks with the various operators to look at provision of further services, the contracting of additional buses to meet those health criteria in the provision of the school bus transport service. I hope and expect the Department of Education, I think they said themselves, it would take a period of time to do that because it's not a small operation. It will involve a very large number of buses, a very large number of drivers. It involves a whole range of other systems, changes, management of the process. But I understand the Department of Education is engaged in that process, engaged in talks with the industry, and that may provide one outlet for operations for a lot of companies that otherwise are very quiet, because there's no bringing football teams, or very little bringing football teams to matches, no tourists, no the myriad of other different really vital services that the coach and bus industry provide is not available. I am hoping in one way that the difficult requirements we've had in the schools bus run area may provide an additional business for those operators, which may help them also through the crisis.
To conclude.
Minister, look, the reality is the taxis, the chauffeur drive and the private school bus operators have been completely ignored by government up to date. Now, Minister, 5 weeks ago I wrote to you as Minister for Transport regarding the private school bus operators in this country, and you have not responded to me. They don't come under the remit of the Department of Education, who are only interested in the ones that are contracted to Bus Éirinn. And in fact, the private operators that are providing private services had to borrow copies of the documents that were circulated by Bus Éirinn to find out what specifications that they needed to meet. Now, that's not good enough. The reality is that the private hire market in this country has completely collapsed at this stage. Now, can I ask you one specific question, Minister, if you could intervene in relation to it? In terms of the second-level school buses, could you explore the possibility of using the buses to bring half the number of students on a first run and then go back for a second run and rotate that on a weekly basis, so that you could double the capacity of the bus fleet in this country very quickly at second level and help address some of the problem?
Thank you. Minister, to conclude.
Deputy, I wouldn't rule anything out, but there is a word there in what you said in this. It is private bus operations, and any such, and I have asked the question myself, could we look at options such as running 2 runs? To make that work, we'd have to get into arrangements with the schools. Would they be happy in terms of the staggered arrival of pupils? Does that get in their way? And inexorably, then you're back to the Department of Education, because you would have to get agreement from the schools via the Department of Education as to how you do that. Believe me, all these various options have been looked at, and it has to be in a coordinated way that the solutions can be found. I mean, the ultimate solution, I would argue, is for us to be able to stabilise the level of COVID, actually not have to proceed with this 50%, and that then brings back into operation on the existed that had been set up on private arrangements. But that is something that we don't have full control over. In the meantime, I will ask the Minister of Education to specifically follow up on your proposal. Is it possible for us in those schools which have private bus service operations? The difficulty is you may have different, because some children will come from a local town, some will come from a further town, and therefore having different arrangements for the different students could be very difficult, and I think that may be one of the constraints in terms of the specific solution. But I will ask and follow up and come back to you if there is any possibilities.